The gunshot rang out across the dusty Montana landscape, sending a flock of startled crows into the air as Lillian Montgomery ducked behind the weathered remains of an abandoned wagon. The year was 1876, and the promise of gold in these hills had drawn both the desperate and the dangerous to this untamed corner of the West. Lillian's trembling fingers clutched the rough burlap sack she'd hastily pulled from her saddlebag, her mind racing as she listened for the sound of approaching hoofbeats. "Come on out, Miss Montgomery," the gravelly voice of Silas Blackwood echoed through the canyon. "Your father's debts ain't gonna pay themselves." Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled the sack over her head, adjusting the crude eye holes she'd cut earlier that morning. The coarse material scratched against her skin, but it was her only hope of disguise. Her father's gambling debts had brought Blackwood's gang to their doorstep 3 days ago, and with her father lying in a shallow grave behind what remained of their homestead, Lillian had fled with nothing but her horse, a few provisions, and the clothes on her back. "I know you're out there, girl." Blackwood called again, his voice drawing closer. Sweat trickled down Lillian's neck as she mounted her horse and urged it forward, keeping low in the saddle. If she could reach Silver Creek by nightfall, she might find help at the trading post there. The burlap sack limited her vision, but she couldn't risk being recognized. Not when Blackwood had sworn to collect her father's debt, one way or another. The sun hung low on the horizon when Lillian spotted smoke rising from a cluster of buildings nestled against the tree line ahead. Relief flooded through her veins as she approached Silver Creek, though she kept to the edge of the tree line, wary of strangers. The trading post was larger than she'd expected, with several buildings gathered around a central street and what appeared to be a modest corral for horses. As she approached, a man emerged from the largest building, a rifle resting casually across his arms. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy, with a worn leather vest over his cotton shirt and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. "That's far enough, stranger," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "State your business in Silver Creek." Lillian reined her horse to a stop, her throat suddenly dry. "I seek shelter," she replied, her voice muffled by the sack. "And perhaps work, if there's any to be had." The man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied her unusual appearance. "You always ride with a sack on your head, not the most welcoming sight for folks around these parts." "It's necessary," Lillian replied, her hands tightening on the reins. "Please, I mean no harm. I've been riding since dawn and need a place to rest." The man lowered his rifle slightly but didn't set it aside. "Name's Isaac Quinn. I run this trading post with my brother. You got a name under that sack?" "Lillian," she answered, hesitating before adding, "Montgomery." Isaac's expression changed at the mention of her surname, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Montgomery? Any relation to Thomas Montgomery from up near Widow's Peak?" Lillian stiffened, fear crawling up her spine. "He was my father. He died 3 days ago." The words felt hollow as they left her lips. "Men came to collect a debt when he couldn't pay." Isaac's demeanor softened immediately. He set the rifle down against the porch railing and approached her horse with measured steps. "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Montgomery. Your father and I had dealings in the past. He was a fair man if prone to games of chance." Lillian nodded beneath the sack, tears welling in her eyes. "The men who killed him, they're looking for me now. That's why I wear this." She gestured to the burlap covering her face. "Blackwood's gang?" Isaac asked, his voice hardening. "Yes, how did they pass through here yesterday asking questions?" Isaac reached up to help her down from her horse. "Come inside, you'll be safe here for the night." Lillian hesitated before accepting his outstretched hand, sliding down from the saddle with weary legs. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." "Isaac," he corrected, leading her horse toward the corral, "and there's no debt between us. Your father once helped me when I was in a tight spot. Consider this repayment of that kindness." The trading post was warm and well-stocked, with shelves lining the walls filled with everything from canned goods to ammunition. A pot of stew bubbled over the fire in the stone hearth, and the scent made Lillian's empty stomach growl audibly. "When's the last time you ate?" Isaac asked, gesturing to a rough-hewn table in the corner. "Yesterday morning," Lillian admitted, still unwilling to remove the sack even indoors. "I've been too afraid to stop for long." Isaac ladled a generous portion of stew into a wooden bowl and set it before her, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat, then we'll figure out what to do about your situation." Lillian stared at the food, then at the small eye holes in her sack. I can't eat like this." Isaac studied her for a long moment, then turned and walked to the door, closing it firmly and sliding the bolt into place. He pulled the curtains across the windows and extinguished all but one lantern, plunging the room into semi-darkness. "No one will see you now," he said quietly. "You can remove it to eat." Gratitude washed over Lillian as she reached up with trembling fingers and pulled the sack from her head. Her auburn hair tumbled down around her shoulders, matted with sweat and dust from the journey. She knew she must look a fright, but the relief of having the scratchy material off her face was worth any embarrassment. Isaac had turned away to give her privacy, but as she set the sack on the table beside her bowl, he glanced back. The look that crossed his face made Lillian freeze, spoon halfway to her lips. "Is something wrong?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Isaac shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "No," he said, his voice oddly strained. "Nothing's wrong, I just wasn't expecting a mess." Lillian supplied with a weak smile. "I'm afraid 3 days on the run doesn't do much for one's appearance." "Beauty," Isaac finished quietly. "I wasn't expecting beauty." A flush crept up Lillian's neck and into her cheeks as she lowered her gaze to her stew. No one had ever called her beautiful before, not her practical father, not the rough men who occasionally passed through their homestead, and certainly not someone like Isaac Quinn, whose kind eyes and strong features made her heart beat a little faster than it should. "You're being kind," she murmured, focusing on her meal. "I'm being honest," he replied, taking a seat across from her. "Now eat. We've got planning to do if we're going to keep you safe from Blackwood." As the evening wore on, Isaac explained that his brother was away in Helena, purchasing supplies and wouldn't return for at least a week. He offered Lillian the small room at the back of the trading post, assuring her that he would sleep in the storeroom and give her privacy. "Blackwood will likely return," Isaac warned as he showed her to the modest bedroom. "He's not one to give up easily, especially if he believes there's money to be had." "There isn't," Lillian said bitterly. "My father gambled away everything we had, including our land." "I have nothing of value to give Blackwood." Isaac's expression darkened. "Men like Blackwood don't always seek payment in gold or land, Miss Montgomery." The implication made Lillian's blood run cold. She'd suspected as much from the way Blackwood had looked at her when he'd come to their homestead, but hearing it confirmed aloud made the danger seem all the more real. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, sinking onto the edge of the narrow bed. "For tonight you rest," Isaac told her, his voice gentle but firm. "Tomorrow we'll formulate a plan. Silver Creek has its share of good people who won't stand for Blackwood's brand of justice." Exhaustion washed over Lillian in a powerful wave, and she nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Isaac. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Get some sleep, Lillian. You're safe now." But as Lillian drifted into an uneasy slumber that night, she couldn't help but wonder how long that safety would last. Morning arrived with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the curtains of Lillian's small room. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, reaching for the burlap sack she'd placed beside her bed, a habit born of fear. A gentle knock at the door made her clutch the sack tighter. "Yes," she called cautiously. "It's Isaac," came the reply. "I've prepared breakfast when you're ready." "I'll be out shortly," Lillian said, relief flooding through her at the sound of his voice. She splashed water from the basin onto her face and did her best to tame her wild auburn hair with her fingers. The simple cotton dress she'd worn for the past 3 days was wrinkled and dust-stained, but it was all she had. With a resigned sigh, she pulled the burlap sack over her head and stepped out into the main room of the trading post. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon greeted her, making her stomach growl appreciatively. Isaac stood at the small stove, his back to her as he tended to the food. "Good morning," she said, her voice muffled by the sack. Isaac turned, a soft smile crossing his features when he saw her. "You don't need that in here," he said, gesturing to the sack. "The curtains are drawn and the store won't open for another hour." Lillian hesitated, then slowly removed the sack, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the light. "Force of habit, I suppose." "A habit we need to break," Isaac said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon on the table for her. "You can't live your life hiding behind burlap, Lillian." "I can't live my life at all if Blackwood finds me," she countered, taking a seat at the table. Isaac poured coffee into 2 tin cups and joined her. "I've been thinking about your situation. My brother and I have connections in Helena, good people who could help you start fresh where Blackwood wouldn't think to look." Hope flickered to life in Lillian's chest. "You would do that for me." "A stranger? You're hardly a stranger now," Isaac replied, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his coffee cup. "And yes, I would." There was something in his gaze that made Lillian's breath catch a warmth that went beyond mere kindness. She looked away quickly, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate this shared breakfast felt. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I can't ask you to risk yourself further. Blackwood seems like a dangerous man. All the more reason not to face him alone." Isaac's hand moved across the table, coming to rest near hers without quite touching. "My brother and I have stood against men like him before. Silver Creek may be small, but we protect our own." "Is that what I am now?" Lillian asked, looking up at him. "One of your own?" Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, something that made her heart beat a little faster. "I'd like you to be," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until the distant sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Isaac was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window and carefully peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 riders, he reported, his voice tense. "Coming fast from the north." Lillian's hand flew to her throat. "Blackwood? Can't tell yet." Isaac moved swiftly to retrieve his rifle from beside the door. "But we should assume the worst. Quick, into the storeroom." Lillian grabbed the burlap sack and followed Isaac through a narrow door at the back of the trading post. The storeroom was dim, filled with crates and barrels of supplies. Isaac guided her behind a tall stack of flour sacks. "Stay here," he instructed. "If things go badly, there's a trapdoor beneath that barrel. It leads to a tunnel that comes out behind the corral. Take my horse and ride west toward the mountains." "I can't leave you to face them alone," Lillian protested. Isaac's expression softened for a moment. "You've got more courage than sense, Miss Montgomery." He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face with surprising gentleness. "But I need you safe. Promise me you'll run if I tell you to." The concern in his eyes made Lillian's resolve waver. "I promise," she whispered. Isaac nodded once, then moved back toward the main room of the trading post. Lillian crouched behind the flour sacks, heart pounding as she heard the front door open and heavy boots cross the wooden floor. "Morning, gentlemen." Isaac's voice was casual, betraying none of the tension she had seen in his face moments before. "What brings you to Silver Creek so early?" "Looking for someone," a gruff voice replied, not Blackwood's, but one of his men, Lillian realized. "Girl with red hair, name's Montgomery." "Haven't seen any redheads come through lately," Isaac replied evenly. "Just passing through, or you planning to spend some money in my establishment?" "Don't get smart with me, Quinn." The voice grew harder. "We know she was headed this way, tracked her horse's prints right up to your door." "Lots of horses come through here," Isaac said. "It's a trading post." There was a tense silence, then the sound of items being knocked from shelves. Lillian flinched at the crash of breaking glass. "Search the place," the man ordered. "She's here somewhere." Lillian's blood ran cold as heavy footsteps approached the storeroom door. She clutched the burlap sack tightly, her mind racing. If they found her here, they would kill Isaac for harboring her. She couldn't let that happen, not when he had shown her such kindness. Making a split-second decision, Lillian pulled the sack over her head and slipped out from behind the flour sacks. She moved quietly to a side door she had noticed earlier, easing it open just enough to slip through into the bright morning sun. Keeping low, she circled around to the front of the trading post, her heart hammering against her ribs. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the porch just as one of Blackwood's men emerged from the trading post, dragging Isaac with him. "Looking for me," Lillian called out, her voice steadier than she felt beneath the burlap. 3 men turned to face her, none of them Blackwood himself, but she recognized them from the attack on her father's homestead. The largest of the 3, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, grinned nastily. Well, the Montgomery girl hiding behind a sack. He shoved Isaac forward, causing him to stumble down the porch steps. "Blackwood's gonna be real pleased when we bring you in." "Let him go," Lillian said, gesturing toward Isaac. "He has nothing to do with this." "He lied to protect you," Scar replied, drawing his pistol. "That makes him involved." Isaac's eyes met Lillian's through the crude eye holes of her sack. "Run," he mouthed silently. Instead, Lillian took a step forward. "My father's debt died with him," she said loudly. "There's nothing for Blackwood to collect." "That ain't what Blackwood thinks," another of the men said with a chuckle. "Says you're worth quite a bit to the right buyer down in Mexico." Horror washed over Lillian at the implication, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I won't go quietly." "Didn't expect you would," Scar replied, cocking his pistol. "But you will go." Everything happened in a blur after that. Isaac lunged forward, tackling the man closest to him. A shot rang out, splintering the wood of the porch near Lillian's feet. She ducked and ran, not toward the mountains as Isaac had instructed, but toward the corral where she had seen a pitchfork leaning against the fence. Behind her, the sounds of a struggle continued, grunts of pain. Another gunshot, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Lillian grabbed the pitchfork and whirled around, only to find Scar standing directly behind her, his pistol aimed at her chest. "Drop it," he growled. Lillian tightened her grip on the pitchfork. "Where's Isaac?" "Your boyfriend's taking a nap," Scar replied with a cruel smile. "Now drop the fork and come quiet, or I put a bullet in you right here." Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Lillian forced it down. Her father hadn't raised a coward. "I'd rather die here than face whatever Blackwood has planned for me," she said, the words barely making it past the lump in her throat. Something shifted in Scar's expression, surprise, perhaps, that this woman hidden behind a sack would choose death over surrender. In that moment of hesitation, a shot rang out and Scar's eyes widened in shock. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt before crumpling to the ground. Lillian turned to see Isaac standing a few yards away, a smoking pistol in his hand and blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Behind him, the other 2 men lay motionless in the dirt. "Are you hurt?" Isaac asked, his voice rough as he moved toward her. Lillian shook her head, the pitchfork falling from her trembling hands. "You're bleeding," she said, reaching toward him. Isaac holstered his pistol and closed the distance between them. Without a word, he reached up and gently pulled the burlap sack from her head, revealing her tear-streaked face to the morning sun. "No more hiding," he said softly, his eyes scanning her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, to Lillian's astonishment, Isaac slowly sank to his knees before her, his expression one of profound wonder. "Isaac," she whispered, confused by his actions. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, his voice breaking, "when I saw him standing over you with that gun." Understanding dawned on Lillian. This man, this virtual stranger, had risked his life for her without hesitation, and the way he was looking at her now, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever beheld. "Why?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Isaac reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Because from the moment you took off that sack last night, I knew my life would never be the same. I know it doesn't make sense, we barely know each other, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as Isaac pressed his lips to her hand. "We should get inside," she said softly. "Others might come." Isaac nodded, rising to his feet but not releasing her hand. Together they moved quickly back to the trading post, barring the door behind them. Isaac lit a lantern and retrieved a medical kit from behind the counter, allowing Lillian to clean and bandage the wound on his forehead. "Blackwood will come looking for his men," Isaac said as she worked. "We need to leave Silver Creek today." "We?" Lillian asked, her fingers pausing in their task. Isaac's eyes met hers, unwavering and certain. "Yes, unless you'd rather go alone." Lillian's heart fluttered in her chest. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she admitted softly. A smile broke across Isaac's face, transforming his features and making him even more handsome than before. "Then we'll go together. My brother has a cabin in the mountains. It's remote but comfortable. We can stay there until we figure out our next move." "What about your trading post?" Lillian asked, finishing the bandage. "Buildings can be rebuilt," Isaac said simply. "Some things are more important." The intensity in his gaze made Lillian blush. "You barely know me," she reminded him. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're brave enough to face down armed men with nothing but a pitchfork. I know you're loyal enough to risk your life rather than let me face danger alone. I know you're beautiful, not just your face, though God knows that's true enough, but your spirit." His words warmed something inside Lillian that had been cold for too long. "You make me sound like someone special." "You are." Isaac's hand came up to cup her cheek. "And if you'll let me, I'd like the chance to spend time learning everything else there is to know about Lillian Montgomery." Lillian leaned into his touch, a sense of rightness washing over her. "I'd like that too," she whispered. They left Silver Creek an hour later after burying the bodies of Blackwood's men behind the trading post and packing what supplies they could carry. Isaac left a note for his brother explaining the situation and promising to send word once they were safely established at the mountain cabin. The journey took 3 days, following game trails and seldom used paths to avoid detection. Each night, they made camp beneath the stars, and Lillian found herself opening up to Isaac in ways she never had with anyone before. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's death when she was 12, about her father's descent into gambling and drink in the years that followed. In turn, Isaac shared stories of his own of coming west with his brother after the war, of building the trading post from nothing, of dreams he still harbored for the future. By the time they reached the cabin, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, Lillian knew she was falling in love with Isaac Quinn. It wasn't just gratitude for his protection or admiration for his courage. It was the way he listened when she spoke, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her across a stream, the respect with which he treated her opinions and thoughts. "It's not much," Isaac said as they approached the cabin, "but it's solid and warm." Lillian smiled, taking in the sturdy log structure with its stone chimney and small covered porch. "It's perfect." The inside was simple but comfortable, with a main room containing a hearth, table, and chairs, and 2 small bedrooms off to one side. Isaac insisted Lillian take the larger bedroom, setting his own things in the smaller one without discussion. That evening, after a meal of rabbit stew cooked over the hearth fire, they sat side by side on a bench on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Lillian felt a peace she hadn't known in years, despite the uncertainty of their situation. "Do you think Blackwood will find us here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Isaac's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her closer against the evening chill. "Not likely. Few people know about this place, and those who do have no reason to betray us to Blackwood." Lillian nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Isaac replied. "My brother will come when he gets my message." He has connections in Helena, people who can help us deal with Blackwood legally. The territorial marshal owes him a favor." "And after that?" Lillian asked, her voice soft. Isaac turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "After that depends on you, Lillian. I won't pretend I don't have hopes, but I won't pressure you either." Gathering her courage, Lillian reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And if my hopes align with yours?" The look that bloomed on Isaac's face was worth any risk, any uncertainty. "Then I'd count myself the luckiest man in the territory," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I think perhaps I'm the lucky one," Lillian whispered, leaning forward to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered as Isaac's arms encircled her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Lillian could see the same wonder in Isaac's eyes that she felt in her own heart. "I never believed in love at first sight," Isaac confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "Always seemed like a fairy tale told to children." Lillian smiled. "Is that what this is?" "Love? Yes," Isaac said without hesitation. "At least for me, I love you, Lillian Montgomery. I know it's fast and probably foolish, but it's true all the same." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unexpected. "Then we're both fools," she said, "because I love you too, Isaac Quinn." His smile was like the sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. "Then we'll be fools together." 2 weeks passed in a haze of quiet happiness as they settled into life at the cabin. Isaac taught Lillian to hunt with a rifle, and she showed him how to make bread the way her mother had taught her. They explored the surrounding forest, fished in the nearby stream, and spent evenings by the fire, planning for a future that grew more concrete with each passing day. When Isaac's brother Daniel finally arrived with news from Silver Creek, they were ready to face whatever came next. "Blackwood's been arrested," Daniel announced as they sat around the table sharing a meal. "Seems he had more enemies than friends." When word spread that he was planning to sell a woman to slavers in Mexico, folks decided they'd had enough of his kind in the territory. Relief washed over Lillian. "So it's over, just like that?" "Not quite," Daniel replied, his expression serious. "His trial's set for next month in Helena. You'll need to testify, Lillian." Isaac's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "We'll go together," he said. "And after the trial, we can decide where to settle." Daniel raised an eyebrow, looking between them with a knowing smile. "I see things have progressed in my absence." Isaac met his brother's gaze steadily. "I've asked Lillian to marry me," he said. "She's agreed." "About time you found someone to settle you down," Daniel said with a grin. "Welcome to the family, Lillian." That night, after Daniel had retired to the small bedroom that had been Isaac's, the couple stood together on the porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. Lillian's hand rested in Isaac's, their fingers intertwined as they had been almost constantly since his proposal the previous evening. "Are you sure about this?" Lillian asked softly. "About us. It's all happened so quickly." Isaac turned to face her, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "Some things you just know, Lillian. From the moment I pulled that sack off your head and saw your face for the first time, truly saw you, I knew my heart wasn't my own anymore. It belonged to you." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as she remembered that moment, how he had fallen to his knees before her, looking at her with such awe and tenderness that it had stolen her breath away. "I was so afraid," she whispered, "hiding behind that sack, terrified of being seen, of being found. And then you found me anyway." Isaac brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "And I'll keep finding you, Lillian, every day for the rest of our lives, no matter what comes, no matter where we go." Lillian rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, she smiled up at him, no longer afraid of being seen, of being known. "No more hiding," she promised. "No more hiding," Isaac agreed, pulling her close against the cool night air. "Just us, facing whatever comes together." And as they stood there beneath the vast Montana sky, Lillian knew that the burlap sack that had once been her shield against the world had led her, against all odds, to the greatest treasure she could have imagined. A love born of courage and kindness, a future bright with possibility, and a man who had seen past her disguise to the woman beneath and had fallen to his knees in awe of what he found there. 1 year later, the cabin that had been their sanctuary had transformed into a home. Isaac and Lillian had married in Helena after Blackwood's trial, with Daniel and a handful of friends as witnesses. They had returned to Silver Creek long enough to sell the trading post to a young couple eager to establish themselves in the growing community, then had made their way back to the mountains where their love had first blossomed. With the money from the sale and Lillian's unexpected inheritance, her father had owned a small gold claim that had finally paid out. They had expanded the cabin, adding rooms and a proper kitchen. Isaac had built a workshop where he crafted furniture that Daniel sold in his new store in Helena, and Lillian had planted a garden that flourished under her care. Their nearest neighbors were a mile away, a family of homesteaders who had become dear friends, and occasionally travelers would stop at their door, drawn by the reputation of Isaac's craftsmanship or Lillian's hospitality. Life was simple, but rich with purpose and love. On the anniversary of the day they had arrived at the cabin, Isaac surprised Lillian with a special gift, a small carved wooden box containing a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged as they sat before the fire, his eyes bright with anticipation. Inside was a tiny scrap of burlap carefully preserved. Lillian looked up at him, puzzled. "To remember where we began," Isaac explained, taking her hand in his, "and how far we've come." Lillian smiled, tears of joy welling in her eyes as she placed her free hand over her swollen belly, where their first child grew stronger each day. "From hiding to being found," she said softly. "From fear to love." Isaac's hand joined hers, feeling the gentle kick of their unborn child. "The best journey I've ever taken," he whispered, leaning forward to kiss his wife as the fire crackled and the future stretched before them, bright with promise.